Evening, Southworth family. Thank you for joining us tonight. We have an exciting virtual presentation tonight. We're doing a virtual beer tasting with a local brewing company here in Virginia. We have John and Bonnie Branding, who are the owners of Wheatland Spring and Farm Brewery. Without further ado, John and Bonnie, I want to turn it over to you.
Well, thanks. Really appreciate it, and thanks for the opportunity to share the story of Wheatland Spring. We thought it might be fun to tell the story of Wheatland Spring through the beer. So let's get down to it.
Yeah, I think a few of you participated in some tastings this week. We dropped off some beverage to your homes. So we're going to go ahead and open the first beverage we have for you this evening. It's our Found Artifacts Unfiltered Pilsner. And show them that can as well. I think TJ is going to show them the can too.
There we go.
It's this one, the really pretty kind of cream colored can.
Oh, there we go. Well done. You got it? So for us, Pilsner's one of our all-time favorite beer styles. It says a lot by its subtleties a lot of times. So for us, we like to accentuate the malt character in here with a little bit of a herbal hop tone. And so the malt plays a huge role in every Pilsner, but in ours in particular, we like to really put that malt character forward. And so you're going to get some freshly leavened bread out of the nose. You're going to get some bite on the hop. And it's meant to be very easy drinking and very quenching. Because the malt plays such a huge role in this beer for us, we wanted to make sure we got the absolute best malt we could find. And so we work with two maltsters right now, and one of them is in North Carolina. So 100% of the malt in this beer came from our growing region here in the Mid-Atlantic. And why that's important to us is because the malt is so fresh. It comes off the fields, it goes to the maltster, and then right from the maltster up to us within the malting process to us within a matter of weeks. And we feel like that freshness is noticeable in the flavor. And I'll also add that I think Pilsner might be Bonnie's favorite beer style.
Super light, super refreshing, great for a day like today, kind of warm, perfect before dinner beverage. And so John was mentioning, so for anyone who's not familiar with Wheatland Spring Farm and Brewery, we're located in Waterford, Virginia. So we're just a little bit north of you guys. We're on a 30-acre farm. We have 20+ acres in crop here that goes straight into our beverage. So while this malt for this beverage came regionally, a lot of our beers feature grain that comes from our own farm. So we're not just brewers and taproom hostesses and hosts here, but we also are farmers, which we really take a lot of pride in. Yeah. So I don't know if anyone is on the line drinking this, but just know that if you want to throw any comments out, we're here for you. If you want to send us a note or hop in with any questions, we're also here.
Hop in, very good.
Hop in, no pun intended.
Yeah, and I think
John and Bonnie, you guys grow your own hops on the farm?
We grow grain and herbs and vegetables.
Okay.
We have our own beehive.
So for the Pilsner, where do you source your hops from?
They come from the Pacific Northwest. Okay. So our concept here is to try to brew the absolute best beer we can. And since beer is an agricultural product, we start with the smallest concentric circle we can and source the best ingredients. And so our farm is able to produce outstanding grain, outstanding fruits, and outstanding produce. And so we use those as much as possible. And we have a couple beehives on the farm.
Oh, nice.
And the Mid-Atlantic is still developing its hop program. Hops were, over a long period of time, they were designed for a certain latitude around the world. Northern Bavaria, and they do really well in the Pacific Northwest and New Zealand. I'm heartened by a lot of the work that's going on right now at the universities in the Mid-Atlantic to develop hop cultivars that I think are going to do exceptionally well here. But that's a process. And so we're making strides there, but it's still in development. And so what we do is we start to expand the concentric circle as needed to get the best ingredients we possibly can to make the beer. And we're fortunate that a lot of the beers come from ingredients that are on our farm or in Virginia or sometimes in North Carolina or Maryland or even Pennsylvania. But nearly all the beer we make is grown regionally from the grain bill.
Beautiful. So, what are the predominant grains you use in most of your beers? Is it barley? Is it wheat?
Sure. Yeah. So barley's a big one. We took out 40,000 pounds of wheat last year from our fields. And so wheat became a big ingredient for us. Our model is essentially looking back at a couple hundred years in Europe. You look at the small farms there, and they would grow as much as they could and then source the rest from their local farms and their other regional neighbors who had those ingredients. And so we intentionally wanted to put that restriction on how we approach this. For the reasons I cited before, for quality, but also to bring out a regional agricultural character. So in wine, it's terroir. And for us, we're trying to instill this idea of bringing in the cultural character of the agriculture in the beer.
We were just talking to someone last night about our what we call land beer and why land beer and why it's so important to us that we're growing the ingredients for our beer here on the farm. And we told some stories of when we lived in Germany for about 5 years, going to these small little towns and stumbling upon one beer bodega in particular in Baden-Baden, Germany. And they had on the menu a white wine, a red wine, and a beer, just whatever they happened to be brewing and serving that day. They didn't specify exactly what type it was, just whatever ingredients they had there on their farm. And that kind of stuck with us for a long time.
Yeah.
Like that was probably 12 years ago now.
Yeah, I guess that's right.
So for the world of wine, they can, if the grapes are locally grown on property and they're all sourced on property, they can use the term estate grown. Does the beer world have something like that, since you guys are like doing most of the agriculture minus the hops right there? Besides like the land beer, do you fall into a certain category that Miller Lite wouldn't fall into, for example?
Yeah, we're proud of that. We brewed our first estate beer last summer. So we just celebrated our 1-year anniversary last week. So we're very young, we're very new here.
Mm-hmm.
And so when we say last summer was our first estate beer, it was really right out of the gates. So we harvested that first 40,000 pounds of wheat and we brewed our first estate Hefeweizen. And with every beer we brew, we seek to employ that thought process of what can we get out of our own farm. So usually we have, even on the cans of beer, we will tell you what percentage of grain came from our farm, what percentage came from other farms. And for beer, the grain is of course the grape. It's really the heart of the beer is the grain. Sure. And then the adjunct ingredients and the hops can change the flavor profiles for you and do wonderful things to it. But the grain's the main ingredient there. And then we're also always looking to, what herbs we have available. Right behind us, if we were to turn around, is our small herb garden. And we have a couple of acres in the back in vegetables as well. So always looking like what's coming out next, what we're able to put into our cool ship, which is another process that we have here on the farm. It's a hundreds of year old process that came out of Europe and Belgium.
Probably the Egyptians were using
Probably
some
Egyptians,
form
who knows? But essentially it's a large open vat. So all of our buildings here on the farm are historic. The property dates from 1832. The building behind us, which houses our brew house, is 100 years old. And the upstairs of that brew house in the loft is this large open vat that we're able to pump wort into and let the wort spontaneously ferment or open air ferment, interact with its environment versus being kept in stainless steel the entire time. So when we're doing one of our cool shipped beers, often perhaps a Saison or something that takes to that sort of environment, we pump wort into a large open vat and let it sit in the open air with a nice mesh net over the top of it for some days to see what the air and what the environment might want to tell us what's here on the farm. We've also captured our own yeast here. So even when we do our open ferments, sometimes we'll also pitch yeast into it. We won't rely solely on the natural microflora in the air to ferment the beer, but we'll pitch yeast that we've caught here on the farm. So then coming back to your point, TJ, of estate, so then we can say that it's estate yeast, estate grain, estate herbs, all these things coming together into the beer. So the hops being an outlier for us, since Virginia is still kind of working through what grows well for us. But we are able to brew some beers without any hops at all. One of those was our Natural Remedy Cool Ship Saison that we did last summer.
But we also do have hops grown locally here in Loudoun. So there's a beer coming out in about a month that was made with our wild captured yeast. We have 3 strains that we use. Our well water, wild captured yeast, our raw and malted wheat. And it was open fermented in the cool ship upstairs and then put in barrels to rest for about, 6 months. And then we just bottled it a couple weeks ago. It's bottle conditioning right now, re-fermenting in the bottle. And that should be ready pretty soon. even the hops there came from Loudon. So that beer is very tightly connected here to our farm and to the region.
We recently had
A true hyper-local product.
Yeah, that's right. We recently had a call with a couple of farm breweries across the United States, including, let's see, Fontaflora in North Carolina and in Wolves and People in Oregon. And we were kind of talking about this idea of estate beers and looking for a terroir in beers. And can we all identify and confirm that that exists? Is that true? And B, do the customers, are they really looking for that? Are they in tune with the idea that beer can change flavor from place to place because of the ingredient use in them? And I think we all kind of agreed yes, and that we're really excited that the beer culture right now is really understanding that and is really interested in that and can really identify with, you know, an estate Hefeweizen brewed here at Wheatland Spring with our own wheat will taste absolutely different than one brewed, you know, in North Carolina because of our climate and the differences that the ground affords us.
I think I have one more question before I leave you guys alone, but
Oh, this is great.
You guys talked about the Cool Ship, and it's not just a cool name. I mean, a Cool Ship is, for the people that know, that is a really awesome functioning piece of equipment you have. And I was fortunate enough to spend some time at a brewery, and we did have a functioning Cool Ship. And I remember telling our guests that would come in that we were, I think, one of 5 functioning Cool Ships in the DC, Maryland, and Virginia area. So that is a very unique talking point, and the fact that it's functioning and you're still brewing beer the way they did before 1800s, I think, is, you probably know better than I do, when they actually moved away from those. But that is really impressive that you guys have that. And I'm sure a nice showpiece for the property as well.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah, it's definitely a lot of extra work to use it.
Yeah.
But we kind of use it exactly as Bonnie was saying in 2 ways, and one is the spontaneous, which is oftentimes more associated with some of the Belgian lambics, some of the spontaneously fermented ales. But we also use a technique of open fermentation with that. And so we pitch yeast that we have. And because the geometry is different of a Cool Ship versus a conical fermenter, which is pretty typical. If you've seen pictures of a brewery, you've seen those big cone-shaped stainless steel tanks. And it creates different sorts of head pressure on the beer.
Mm-hmm.
And so as the yeast is activating, just the geometry of the tank can alter how the yeast expresses itself, how the esters come about, and the flavor profile development as a result of that. You still get some open fermentation and top cropping in parts of southern Bavaria, northern Austria, when they do wheat beers down there. It's still part of the process that they do in some places. And for us, we thought it just made a lot of sense if we have a yeast that we captured in a tree that's 200 feet from where we're sitting right here, and it's one of our 3 estate yeasts, using that in the Cool Ship to open ferment in the air of the barn, and we open up the windows up there as well to let it express itself as much as possible and not hinder it with any kind of contained geometry that you'd find in a tank. Once that's done, we put it in barrels and let it sit for a little while longer to process and kind of mellow through the different transformations that have happened. And then the plan is to bottle it in a couple months. So there's a lot of patience with these beers.
One of the fun things for me that I've been watching as our team utilizes the Cool Ship is kind of the experimentation that's happening. Yep. So we don't claim to be experts at this, and we don't really want to be. So some of our beers, we don't even know how to, you know, properly categorize them, but we kind of decide, hey, I think we're going to orient this as a wit because people will identify that flavor profile as a wit, even though it's not necessarily brewed in the same fashion. And I think it's really neat that we're just kind of, you know, Cool Shipping in the summer, for example. So a lot of times the Cool Ship's only used in colder weather, but we're not going to be constrained to that. So I think that's been a lot of fun for us.
Yeah, and I think that actually goes to a little bit about how we look at agricultural character or terroir. And I think for us, we get asked the question sometimes, are different parts of your field, do they reflect the grain differently? And the short answer is we don't know yet. We haven't been at this long enough. We don't have the benefit of centuries of a family passing down knowledge generation to generation who understand the earth so well that they can express which slopes have different minerality for the grapes. We just don't know yet. And so maybe our great-great-grandchildren will be able to figure out.
Knock on wood, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Knock on wood. Exactly. Where we're here on the property, grains express themselves differently because water, which is the single biggest ingredient in beer, comes it's 50 feet from the brew house where we are right now. So it's all that is the water here on the land. And our thought is, the longer we do this, to Bonnie's point, the more we're going to learn, the more we're going to be able to understand what the ingredients are trying to tell us, and how we can best guide that and not strive for consistency, but strive for quality and ingredient expression. Because as it is an agricultural product, agriculture is not consistent. It's all over the board. The wine industry has done a fantastic job of educating consumers that one vintage to another vintage is going to be different, and not only is that okay, it's celebrated. Whereas beer has taken a different approach, and it's said consistency above all else. And so we don't care for that very much, and so we kind of go in the opposite direction. We want to celebrate the lack of consistency, but focus on the quality. So different grains tell us different things, and we want to express those differently.
And I'm going to hop in for a minute. This next little can is looking at me. So we're going to pop another can as we continue our conversation. We have a Kolsch coming up. It's dry hopped. So just to continue on John's thought, we brewed that first estate Hefeweizen last, I want to say July. It was in the summer sometime. But we're brewing again our next Hefeweizen this summer. And I am quite interested to see how, you know, the two might differ in flavor. So it'll be our first kind of experimentation in this exact same style. So we'll have to see how that goes.
Yeah, no, that's right. And I think that the current calling, so Kolsch beer, there's a mandate over in Germany. I guess it's a form of appellation or origination claim that Kolsch has to be brewed within the confines of Cologne. And so for us, we love Kolsch beer so much. We think it's a fantastic beer for so many reasons. And so we like we're doing here, wanted to interpret it in a way that made sense for us. And so we dry hopped it at the end. So it doesn't taste like a Kolsch you'd find in Cologne, but we like to think it tastes like a Kolsch you'd find at Wheatland Spring.
That's right. And then also, in their honor, it does also read Kolsch style. So as John was mentioning, like champagne, we're not supposed to call this a Kolsch, it's only a Kolsch style. And I think in that same thread, you know, our commitment to tradition and our commitment to sourcing is shown through this. We have in our brew house, for example, it's, as a lot of you know, it's all stainless steel, unless we get into the wood portion of what we're doing, unless we get into some of the other, you know, abstract things that we're doing. But all that stainless steel, we were sure to source 100% U.S. stainless steel, made in the U.S. And we literally shook hands with the welder before he made our system. You know, going to painstaking lengths to ensure that every element of what we're doing feels good at the end of the day. It feels like something that we can be proud of, not only today, but to tell our kids about when they're old enough. They're just too young right now, but when they can understand it. But yeah, so along that same thread, to be sure to pay respect to the founders of Kolsch by saying it's a Kolsch style, not just a Kolsch.
Yeah, and I think that's also, it ties in a little bit to what we were talking about with the coolship, and it's understanding and respecting those that have come before us and those that have trailblazed in certain areas, but we try to use that as an empowerment to shoot off in our own direction versus handcuffs to be constrained to do certain things. And so for us, it's important to understand why the coolship was used in the first place, using that as an example, so we can best use that to make a beer that expresses Wheatland Spring, instead of trying to make a beer that expresses a place in Belgium that isn't here.
Makes sense.
Which is nothing to take away from their beer, because it is amazing.
It's amazing.
Dry hop Kolsch is absolutely one of my all-time favorites. And would you guys briefly touch upon the difference between what's dry hop versus a hopped beer? What does that term mean when you say dry
Sure.
hop?
Yeah. The not only did the hops make a difference in the beer, the type of hops, but also the time in which they hit the liquid. And what I mean by that is, typically you have hops that go in early in the boil that are used for bittering. So the type of oils and acids that come out of the hops at that point will create a bitter taste, because all the other aromatics that if you drink a very hoppy IPA, a lot of those are volatilized early in the process. And so you don't get those aromas and flavors. You do get the bitter part of that, the alpha in that, the alpha acid. But the further you go along in the process, at a very basic way of looking at it, you get more aroma and flavor out of the hops. And depending on the hops, it could express anything from a citrus to a pine cone to a mango to a pineapple to all these different sorts of flavors now as we get more into hops. But on the hot side, where you put the hops in, that tends to be for the boil a bittering. And then as you go into the whirlpool, when you're starting to cool it down and drop the proteins out of the boil, the trube, then you start to get into a little bit more of the flavor and aroma. When they're dry hopped in the tank, it's already typically done fermenting, so as not to disrupt yeast, although that's not written in stone. But then you dry hop there to get a more full expression of the hop flavor. And so when you dry hop, it tends to give much bigger essence of the flavor and aroma. But with that also sometimes comes a grassier or vegetative taste that goes along with the hop, which makes sense because you're throwing produce into the tank at that point.
Sure.
Yeah, but these are, this was dry hop with Euconaut, which is it's still not as popular as maybe some mosaics or citras or those sorts of hops, but we feel like it has a really interesting dynamic flavor to it. Refreshing for the summer. Yeah.
Thank you for that.
What else?
Are there any questions from the audience here?
Not that I'm seeing right now, but if
Okay.
anyone messages, it'll pop up, so we will be aware.
There is a chat window down below. If anyone
Okay.
doesn't want to turn on their mic or camera, they can absolutely just type in the chat window, and that should pop up as well.
Perfect. Yeah, very good. Well, we can. Speaking of hops, we can get to our IPA. This is our. We don't. I wouldn't say we have flagships here. We intentionally kind of wanted to steer. There it is. Test the time.
This looks good.
We intentionally wanted to steer away from flagships. But this one, this is our, I guess, house IPA. So it's meant to be balanced. It's bitter when IPAs used to still be bitter before hazies took over. We do like our hazies, but I think a little bit of bitterness in an IPA is also nice from time to time. So this is tested time. The idea was to make it reminiscent of a West Coast IPA. So some of the trailblazers in the West who came up with an IPA. So it's nice to have that bittering, but also some of the bold hop flavors come in the back. And this was double dry hopped with mosaic and blanking now. Come back to me in a minute.
Okay.
Yeah.
And all three of these, by the way, all three of these cans just came out this week. These are fresh for you. I think on Tuesday was our canning run, so you're drinking them just about as soon as you possibly can. And we also had a celebratory bottle release this week. It was our open fermented citrus wit. That one, you'll be seeing perhaps an article come out from Brightest Young Things, if any of you follow that in the near future. But we are really happy about that one as well. We opened it for the first time on our anniversary this past Saturday. And it goes back to what we were talking about with the cooliship. It was open fermented in our cooliship, featuring our estate ingredients as well. On the back of this Test of Time can, it does mention 25% of the grain came from our farm. And then we're excited to up that this year. So we're about to harvest a nice harvest of barley. I forget about how many acres of our land is in barley right now, but of our 20 acres in crop, I would say maybe half of it's in barley, something like that. And we're just about at the point where we're going to harvest that and send it to our maltster, who's not far away in Virginia, a good friend of ours. He's at Murphy and Rood. It's also a small family business. He and his wife, and they just opened a couple of years ago as well. So essentially what's going to happen here, maybe even as soon as this Saturday, we're taking all of this grain out of our fields. It's going to be tractored over to the other side of our property where John and his colleague are going to be cleaning it, meaning they're going to take weeds out of the barley.
We do thankfully have a machine there, but it's pretty tough.
Okay. And then it'll be sent off to a lab for analysis, so we know exactly what quality of wheat we're working with, and then sent down to our maltster. So that's kind of the next thing on our horizon that we're looking forward to in the very short term, I guess this week perhaps.
Yeah, this is one of the daunting parts about what we're doing here is that it's not only running a full brewery, but also the farming. And it's, Mother Nature's in charge here. We're just trying to keep up the best we can. And we have to take moisture readings to understand kind of where the grain's at, what the maturity of the grain is, if it's ready to be pulled. And we're getting close, and Mother Nature doesn't care about weekends or weekdays or the weather coming up. So we're trying to thread the needle here a little bit and make sure we get it out before the next rainstorm hits.
Sure. Did you two, I don't know if you saw the chat window pop up, but we had Mr.
Sure.
Pellerito ask us, where did you two learn your art of brewing? You have a broad knowledge, so it'd be interesting to know your background.
Sure.
That's awesome. So
thanks for the question.
Thank you. A couple of things, and I'll kick it over to John. So one fun story is that the very first time John was able to brew was after our wedding. So I don't even know how many years ago we got married now, but a while ago. And John got a homebrew kit from one of our groomsmen who happened to be German. It was during the time that we were living in Germany, and his family comes from a brewing background. So it was a great influence. John and I had this dream that we wanted to one day perhaps have a farm brewery, even before John dabbled in brewing. So that was quite exciting. So alongside that knowledge that John built like any other home brewer would build, we also knew when we were undertaking this huge adventure that we also wanted to hire on someone who had, incredible experience. So we sought out someone literally nationwide. We found our head brewer, Austin, in Oregon, most recently brewing at Bowie in Astoria, Oregon. And over a series of conversations, in-person interviews, he visited here, we visited there, we spent weeks together. We all kind of felt like it was the best fit and good family feeling. So it was, his commercial expertise coming in, and then John's knowledge of, home brewing and learning to brew like folks do. So.
Yeah, and I get the wedding present was kind of it was a tongue-in-cheek wedding present because he knew we were interested in opening a brewery, but the kit was kind of one of these rudimentary kits. It was a very kind of basic homebrew kit, and so part of the joke was that his family came from a strong brewing tradition. He had 3 generations of brewers there. They were learning at the best academies in Germany, and they were going out to be the brewmasters for some of the biggest breweries in Europe. And so he gives me this little tiny brew kit. So it was pretty funny at the time, but I guess it was prescient in a way because of how things turned out. But I got into home brewing not to do the hobby first and then transition to this. We knew we were going to do this, and so I got into home brewing, read every book I could, got into as much of the practical part of the brewing process as I could to understand the technical aspects of it. So we could have serious conversations with other brewers to understand how we're understanding the ingredients, how to manipulate the yeast, and how the biochemistry works to create the different flavor profiles that eventually we're trying to create. So for us, it was important not just to have a passing interest or kind of a superficial understanding, but it was really to dig down deep into understand what makes it work so that we could produce the best possible beer we could.
And then Austin's strong background, he came to us with already 9 years of professional experience. So now he's, over a decade in brewing professionally. So that combination has worked out well for us. We're really happy with how things are going. And then we have a lovely comment here from Avanti as well.
I think there's one
there's another
just
one.
before
Sorry.
this. Oh, no, it was just about muting. Never mind. Okay.
It says, I saw on your website that you have a project called Hope Grows. I'd love to hear more about that, the motivation behind it, and why it's so close to your hearts. And I think I might want to turn this one over to John because he's really the one who developed this and brought it to life.
Well, this was it's kind of you to say, but I think this was definitely a team effort. It was our entire foundation here is built on making a connection with agriculture. And so from our perspective, at some point, beer and agriculture got separated. And so typically you walk into a place and you get a beer and it comes in a glass and it's magic how it gets there. Wine is different in a lot of ways because it comes from a grape, and the grape is somehow crushed and
it's somehow
still
more tangible.
It's
as
still
well.
a little bit magic, but it comes from a grape. Beer kind of comes from this process that seems a little bit mythical. And so we wanted to break that down a little bit. And for us, the connection between small farms and what we're trying to do here is so close. Our entire mission here is to celebrate and strengthen small farms. And so for us, we saw what was happening over the last couple months. Everything was going fine, and then the world went pear-shaped a few months ago. And so we thought to ourselves, we can't do everything, but maybe if we focus our efforts on one thing that is, as the question indicated, very near and dear to our hearts, maybe we can have some sort of small impact, both through bringing awareness to what small farms are dealing with right now, and also funding them and giving them tangible support in the moment right now. And so we partnered with an organization called Future Harvest, which is an amazing group of people, and they have an amazing mission to educate the next generation of small farms. And so they work with a lot of sustainable farms in the area, and their goal is to make sure that we have small farms going into the future, which aligns so closely with what we're trying to do here. And the first fundraising effort went well. We sold T-shirts and we made a beer dedicated to Hope Grows. The proceeds from that went to this organization. And for the first round, we're picking folks right now to give them money that will buy their produce, because if farmers markets are closed or the restaurants are half capacity, they can't sell the produce like they were going to, and they already invested the money. So Future Harvest buys their produce, donates it to local food banks. So the farmers get made whole, and then food banks who don't have enough food right now for the food insecure in our region, they're able to get additional proceeds and produce to help support folks right now.
And the response to that project has been so great. It's always nice when you have one of these ideas and people really latch onto it. Those beers that were, intended for the project. It's called Hope Grows IPA. It actually just sold out today. The very, very last beer was sold, and people have still been buying those T-shirts. We're sending them all over the place into Maryland and whatnot. So
yep.
That's been a really nice project.
Yeah, because I think it's something. Unfortunately, sometimes it takes an event like this for people to start to think about food security and supply chain, and who's touching lettuce and who's growing their vegetables, and where this all comes from. And so if there is a benefit, I think it's people are looking more closely at small farms and CSAs. We operate with a community supported farm brewery model, which is mimicked from the community supported agriculture model, because we believe in that. We believe in trying to integrate the farming and the production to the consumer.
And so we just had a lovely call with two of our good friends, Sarah and Nate at Walsh Family Wine, and also the folks at Catoctin Creek Distillery. And we were all talking about kind of one of the silver linings of everything that's been going on in the last months. Our people are really standing up, looking local, even those who believed it before, even supporting Stronger now. So that's a really beautiful thing that's happening in the community.
After listening to you all talk about this, and to put you in a category, what would you guys classify yourselves? Are you agriculturalists? Are you farmers? Are you brewers? Are you mad scientists? What would you?
Yes. To all.
If you had to, obviously you're a little bit of each, but what, it's interesting to hear, most breweries aren't going to that length at all. They're more interested in where they're importing their grain, where their hops are coming from. They're getting quality control. But here you are looking at, in the future, obviously, like acidity levels of the soil and the sloping and how that's going to affect everything. So
we like to think that we are agricultural first, and that's really broad terms, but I think it captures everything we're doing. So yes, we are a brewery. Yes, we're focused on making the very best beer that we can. But at the end of the day, I think we would call ourselves blanket agricultural.
Sure. Yeah, we look at the beer as a value-added product coming from agriculture, and so it's in a lot of ways I guess it's closer to what maybe a small winery would be that does estate wines, except we make beer.
That's what we don't want to talk your ears off there. We would love to answer any more questions that anyone has on the call. And if TJ, if you have anything else for us, we would love to stay here as long as you like, but we also want to be respectful of your time.
Oh, that's very nice. Thank you. Yeah. I've pinged all the questions I could think of. And yeah. I'm very excited about getting out to your property one day and putting my eyes on that cool ship. That is just, not to get too nerdy, but that is like Disneyland for me. That would be,
fun.
That would be really cool.
Please come out and see us.
And on the back end, I don't know if you guys are golfers or not, but we'd love to have you out to the property for dinner, show you what Creighton Farms is, and show you some of our membership as well, because I'm sure that a lot of them would like to come out and see your property as well. We're very big, hyper local. Anytime we can get a local product in here, we'd love to support that as well.
Oh, that's
thank you.
lovely.
That's awfully
Thank you so
kind.
much.
Yeah, we'll take you up on that.
Absolutely, please.
Very good.
Well, I'll just we'll wait here for a few more seconds to see if anybody has any questions, and then this is a great thing you guys have done, and we really appreciate your time as well and the knowledge, because like you said, it's this industry is becoming not just food and beverage, but beer. My gosh, the knowledge of the consumer has, as you know, has grown like tenfold. Sometimes I'm talking to people about beer, and I've spent time on a property before, and they're talking circles around me. So you can't, fake your way through it with the consumer anymore, and especially within the industry. People, like you said, when you're talking to other brewers, you wanted to have the knowledge of what you're doing. So it's one of those things where the consumer is almost caught up to the rest of the industry with their knowledge. It's exciting.
I love that. I absolutely love that, because there's as much as we know here. Bonnie said this earlier. We really don't know anything, right? We're still exploring. We're still learning. We're still building this set of knowledge. And farming and brewing are two occupations where you can't possibly know everything. You're always learning as you go about it. You're always being taught things.
Mistakes are the best teacher.
That's right.
You're right.
Absolutely. Well, it looks like we got one more question. Great presentation. They're just saying thank you.
That was kind.
Oh, that's
Thank you very much.
kind. Thank you for listening in.
Yeah, thank you.